Hello YouTube, this is Sadako24 here, and shit has gotten serious, let's say. As you've all seen, this war between Israel and Gaza, which began on October the 7th with Hamas militants breaching Israeli defences and breaking into a kibbutz and committing a massacre of innocent civilians, massacring a peace festival, taking hostages, murdering families, as of course led to retaliations from Israel, inevitable retaliations from Israel, furious retaliations from Israel. And now, of course, after months of bombardment by Israel on the Gaza Strip, South Africa has lobbied the International Court of Justice to bring Israel to court on charges of genocide, on charges of war crimes. And it's kind of illuminated things for me. I've gone all over the place in this conflict. I've gone from thinking I was championing Israel to the bitter end to wipe out Hamas and not care about anything other than victory, to despairing at what the war is doing to the people of Gaza and what it's done to me. I felt ashamed. I felt like a terrible person for championing this war. Championing, well, being so cold to the bloodshed, but knowing there isn't really any other way this ends. Hamas has forced Israel's hand. They've threatened to do October the 7th again and again, so there is no possibility of a ceasefire. My last video was an attempt to find something of a middle ground suggestion. A naive hope that maybe it was time to entertain the possibility of a ceasefire that will allow the Gazan people to decide what happens to Hamas. Whether the Gazan people will stand by Hamas in this, or whether they will revolt, whether they will finally say, we've had enough of Hamas. They're the ones who brought this calamity and catastrophe on us. They don't care a jot about us. And maybe trusting in the power of revolution for the people of Gaza. And I got to be honest, when the genocide case was brought forward, I thought, mate, as the chance for a ceasefire grew louder and louder, I was hoping maybe the decision would be made for me. And that maybe there was a chance it could work out, as I predicted. And of course, the International Court of Justice would of course force Israel to down hands. Would force a peaceful resolve. But it's also kind of crystallized where I really stand in this and where the other side stands in this as well. I did, a month or two ago, put out a video in which I tried to play devil's advocate for Jeremy Corbyn on his seeming hesitation, his inability to condemn Hamas as a terrorist group.
Israel claiming it is conducting legitimate self-defense. Where is legitimate self-defense pre-ordering the bombing of a hospital knowing there are children in it?
Bill Clinton in 2016, he was president of the United States for 2 terms, right? That Hamas were using hospitals, schools, mosques and others deliberately. And they don't care about Palestinian lives. They don't care about them. They knew when they did what they did on October the 7th, there was going to be a massive reaction by Israel. They knew thousands of innocent Palestinians would die. They don't care about their people. So my question for you, Jeremy, which you haven't answered, Jeremy,
there are
and I want you to answer.
Dead already.
I know.
How many more are there going to be before this is over?
And like I said, the question of should Hamas be removed from power I did say, well, maybe it's a question. Maybe the problem is, if you're as much of a pacifist as Corbyn, then the problem with removing Hamas from power is that you can't do that bloodlessly. And it seemed that for Corbyn, it would be better if Hamas remained in power and the bombing stopped. But conversely, that was the dilemma for me is that we'd already seen so many lives lost in the cause of removing Hamas. Would it be the worst thing if nothing was achieved by those deaths? Nothing was achieved from those deaths. If there's a chance that something could be achieved, then it had to be worth it. I am less charitable to Corbyn now, however.
Of Palestinian people all my life, and will continue to be all my life, because they've been so badly treated by history.
Mr. Corbyn, at the time there was a significant event that was again and again put forward by the British press as to you calling Hamas or Hamas delegation of friends, and then it took some time for you to say that they're a terrorist organization, which you did say.
I'm sorry, this incident that you refer to took place more than a decade ago. It was in a meeting when I was asking where somebody had gone from the meeting. At the same time, by the way, Tony Blair and many others were meeting Hamas almost every day. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Who are you representing?
Presenting Israel's largest newspaper. The reason I ask the question is because, this war is with Hamas. And
this war is a war that is killing thousands and thousands and thousands of wholly innocent Palestinian people. I support the South African application today.
Hamas has some responsibility for that, Mr. Corbyn.
Thank you.
Do you think that Hamas has some responsibility for this war?
Corbyn has, outside of that interview, referred to what Hamas did as terrorism. He has condemned Hamas, but he always seems to cling on to the idea, that usually his rhetoric takes the tone of, these are warring enemies, and Hamas just lashed out, and that the root cause was Israel. That's just his woolly thinking. But he's been given chances to condemn Hamas as a terror group. In this instance, he actually passed up on the chance. Yet here he is going to The Hague to support a prosecution against Israel. So suddenly he's not so neutral. By prosecuting Israel, he's showing, kind of throwing into stark contrast, that he didn't even give a condemnation of Hamas. And Hamas should be prosecuted. Hamas are the ones that should be prosecuted for genocide. If there's a case for prosecuting Israel for genocide, fair enough, but there's even more of a case to prosecute Hamas for genocide. For their anti-Semitic charter, for their bloodlust on the October the 7th attack, for their threats to repeat October the 7th, for their rocket barrage, their constant rocket barrages at Israel.
Hamas has said that they will do this again and again. There is no way anyone can live beside that. What that looks like, what the defeat of Hamas looks like, we'll see. But a ceasefire is not the answer to that. And anyone who thinks otherwise should come here and learn something.
And the case against Israel, I was disgusted to listen to it because it was very clearly, but it was clear listening to the case that it was a complete sickening whitewash of Hamas's part in provoking this war.
There is no indication at all that Israel accepts responsibility for rebuilding what it has destroyed. Instead, the destruction is celebrated by the Israeli army. Soldiers film themselves joyfully detonating entire apartment blocks and town squares, erecting the Israeli flag over the wreckage, seeking to re-establish Israeli settlements on the rubble of Palestinian homes, and thus extinguishing the very basis of Palestinian life in Gaza.
But I think everyone has to realize, among other things, that this civilian population was handed the Gaza in 2005 by the Israelis, who took every single Jew out of Gaza. They forced them out of their homes. Hamas was Gaza rather, but Palestinians were effectively given a state in Gaza. There were no Jews, no Israelis. And what did they do with it from 2005 onwards? The population voted in Hamas, which then did a coup against Fatah, which killed their fellow Palestinians, and so they've had 18 years to run a state. And this is what we have, Julia. All the people who talk about the two-state solution and all this sort of thing should remember there was a state given to the Palestinians in 2005, and all that the world got, all that we taxpayers in the West got, was a terror state, which has spent the last 18 years committing terrorism against the state of Israel.
This is an impossible situation for the people of Gaza and for those trying to help them. The fighting must stop. Close quote.
And, you know, it even, like, the points put forward about how Israel were guilty of genocide were, you know, some rather rhetorical kind of, you know, saber-rattling rhetoric from the, you know, belligerent saber-rattling rhetoric from, you know, certain Israeli ministers about what to do about the Hamas threat, which, you know, was being kind of, you know, scrutinized as showing an intent and a plan to genocide the Gaza.
The suffering of the Palestinian people, physical and mental, is undeniable. Turning to the third genocidal act under Article 2C. Israel has deliberately imposed conditions on Gaza that cannot sustain life and are calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Israel achieves this in at least 4 ways. First, by displacement. Israel has forced the displacement of about 85% of Palestinians in Gaza. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have either been killed or at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. Many Palestinians have been displaced multiple times as families are forced to move repeatedly in search of safety. Israel's first evacuation order on 13 October required the evacuation of over 1 million people.
And on the third point, there was, I do remember distinctly, the third point was about the conditions of Gaza, the fact that it's almost an unlivable environment.
Israel has deliberately inflicted conditions in which Palestinians in Gaza are denied adequate shelter, clothes, or sanitation. For weeks, there have been acute shortages of clothes, bedding, blankets, and critical non-food items.
No mention made of the fact that Gaza was given a hell of a lot of aid money in 2005 by the US, and that Hamas used that aid money on war rockets and constructing tunnels. Basically wasted the chance to build something out of the Gaza and provide for their impoverished people. Hamas were not interested. All they wanted was to just wage war on Israel, wage an insane, unwinnable war on Israel, and keep their people in a state of perpetual war.
Israel has suffered the most heinous crime. The people of Israel demand, all right-thinking people demand that this genocidal bunch of murderers are obliterated from the face of the earth. And believe you me, it will happen. Now, Israel will always put their hand out, one hand out to peace. That is in our nature. We wish to live in peace in this region. We, of course, that one of the reasons why this entire terrible thing has happened is because we were getting closer peace, particularly with Saudi Arabia. We knew that the genocidal murderers in Hamas and in Iran, their principal funders didn't want that to happen, which is why they launched this attack. But we will always try our hardest for peace. But in the words of King David, there is a time for peace and a time for war. And right now, it's time to obliterate Hamas.
I could see clearly it was a whitewash of Hamas, and this is something I'm always very keen to listen to from commentators on the war. Do they even acknowledge that October the 7th is a mitigating circumstance for Israel to be conducting this war the way it has? And I've seen hardly anyone on the left do so.
Civilians become the victims of war and the victims of in this case, of the actions of Hamas.
So
we can't get Hamas.
They're not the victims of the actions of Hamas. Hamas is not flying the F-16 supplied by the US.
No, they're not. They crossed the border into Israel and murdered 1,400 people with their bare hands.
Well, not with their bare hands, but they're not dropping.
I'm sorry, with knives held in their bare hands.
It's always with the agenda to villainize Israel for responding to that terror attack. To make out that it was to downplay October the 7th. To make out that it wasn't so bad. To make out that Israel had a conspiracy to cause it. And to enact an ulterior motive. And listening to this, I thought it would be a horrible... And two thoughts came to mind of this. Firstly, that Israel was being prosecuted when really Israel's only crime in this is waiting this long to take Hamas out. Like I said, Israel could have taken Hamas out back in 2006. They could have sent their forces in, they could have conducted this offensive back then, and they probably would have got it done a lot quicker and easier because Hamas was less numerous back then. It was less embedded in Gaza society. They could have done it then, and it would have prevented everything that happened since. And essentially, Israel is being condemned for responding too late to the threat, for trusting in the idea that Hamas could be tolerated after all. But the other thing I kept thinking was about the victims, the women abducted, raped, mutilated in the kibbutz. At the peace festival. I just thought this is completely throwing them under the bus. You know, it's declaring that Hamas had a right to do this and that Israel did not have a right to respond. That what Hamas has done to provoke Israel, it's worked. It's actually gained legitimacy for a case against Israel to destroy Israel. And there is I don't care what your cause about the sins of Israel are. A strategy like that should never be rewarded with victory. People like that do not deserve to win by doing that. And I realise it's an evil world if they do, and which reminds me again that Hamas are an evil entity. And much of my rage in this is that there are some evils that it is worth waging war to get rid of. There's some evil forces that just have to be eradicated, and Hamas is the worst. It really is the worst. I kind of realised that the people making this case were not interested in the nuances of this conflict at all. They were not interested in the evils of Hamas at all. There was a deliberate attempt to lynch Israel here. And only Israel.
Hamas is a terrorist organization?
South Africa, like many other countries in the South, has not declared Hamas as a terrorist organization. That does not mean we condone what Hamas has done. The fact that other jurisdictions have declared them a terrorist organization does not mean that we should do the same. You see that Hamas is active in places like Qatar and Turkey formally. In South Africa, they are not active. They don't have any bases there, which has been claimed as well. We engage with all Palestinian stakeholders. We have the colleagues here from the Palestinian state. We've got Mr. Ammar Hijazi, who's the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in Palestine, and I don't know if you'd like to comment on that as well, but from our perspective, I've just given you that perspective. Yeah?
Just a question about the journalists. You know that Israel...
And I thought that this would be a rewarding of Hamas. You know, giving kind of moral succor to what Hamas did. Really sickened me.
South Africa casts its net widely. In its application, it uses the word context many times. In particular, it declares that it is important to place the acts of genocide in the broader context of Israel's conduct towards the Palestinians during its 75-year-long apartheid. Leaving aside the outrageous nature of that statement, why stop at 75 years? Why not refer to 1922 and the approval by the Council of the League of Nations of the British Mandate? Or 1917, the proclamation of the Balfour Declaration? Maybe also include the entry into the land of Israel of the Israelite tribes some 3,500 years ago. No. The immediate and proximate context for the specific allegations of genocide claimed by South Africa lies in the events of the 7th of October, when Hamas militants and other armed groups and individuals stormed into the internationally recognized sovereign territory of Israel and committed acts of barely credible atrocity. It was these events that truly constitute the real context for South Africa's allegations. Indeed, such acts may be seen as the real genocide in this situation. As the President of the European Commission put it on the 19th of October, there was no limit to the blood Hamas terrorists wanted to spill. They went home by home. They burned people alive. They mutilated children and even babies. Why? Because they were Jews. Because they were living in the state of Israel. And Hamas's explicit goal is to eradicate Jewish life from the Holy Land. These terrorists, supported by their friends in Tehran, will never stop. And so Israel has the right to defend itself in line with humanitarian law.
Now, I was relieved when Israel, the representatives of Israel made their counter case, their defense. Yeah, they pointed out the truculence of South Africa in this. And they made a case for why, they showed images from the Hamas-owned hospitals of, weapons depots there, and just the obscene nature of Hamas that they will, embed themselves in civilian areas, in hospitals. Just kind of reminding us the kind of obscene and creepy death cult we're dealing with here with Hamas.
Damage to civilian structures is another fact claimed by South Africa as evidence of genocide. But South Africa does not consider the sheer extent to which Hamas uses ostensibly civilian structures for military purposes. Houses, schools, mosques, UN facilities, and shelters are all abused for military purposes by Hamas, including as rocket launching sites. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels dug by Hamas under populated areas in Gaza often cause structures above to collapse. In the slides before you, you can see a militant priming projectiles for launch on IDF forces in Gaza. You can see the holes in the residential house to hide and launch them. Here, you can see projectiles discovered underneath a bed in a child's bedroom. Here, a rocket being fired from a school. The launch site is circled in red. Here you can see firing from a UN school. You can see the letters UN on the roof, and the fire is circled in red. And here, long-range rocket launchers hidden inside a Scouts Club building. Finally, you can see part of a tunnel that runs for 4 kilometers, including nearby the Erez crossing, which is adjacent to Israel. Gaza's infrastructure has certainly been harmed during the conflict. However, South Africa would have the court believe that Israel is deliberately and unlawfully destroying homes without cause, but harm caused to lawful military objectives and harm caused as a result of Hamas's actions is not evidence of genocide. South Africa also alleges that Israel has waged an assault on Gaza's health system. What South Africa has neglected to bring before the court, however, is the overwhelming evidence of Hamas's military use of such hospitals. Hamas militants retreated to Rantisi Hospital in Gaza on October 7th with hostages from Israel, whom they then held in the basement. In the slide before you, you will see a militant going into Quds Hospital with an RPG. Hamas fired at IDF forces from near and from within the Quds Hospital. At Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, Hamas managed operations from a closed-off area. Here you can see an opening to the tunnel that ran for hundreds of meters directly under the hospital. Here, you can see the weapons found in different wings of the hospital. And here, CCTV footage showing armed militants bringing hostages into the hospital's lobby. More than 80 militants hiding inside another hospital, the Adwan Hospital, surrendered themselves to the IDF. And here, you can see a weapon that IDF forces discovered hidden inside incubators at the hospital. The director of the hospital has admitted that numerous members of hospital staff belong to Hamas's military wing. In the Indonesian hospital in the neighborhood of Jabalia, Hamas forces managed their operations from that hospital until the IDF reached it. IDF forces recovered the bodies of 5 murdered hostages from a tunnel dug underneath the hospital. The list goes on. In every single hospital that the IDF has searched in Gaza, it has found evidence of Hamas military use. Israel is acutely aware that because of Hamas's use of hospitals as shields for its military operations, in grave violations of international humanitarian law, patients and staff are at risk. This is why the IDF has reached out to every hospital and offered assistance in relocating patients and staff to safer areas. Hospitals have not been bombed. Rather, the IDF sends soldiers to search and dismantle military infrastructure.
Israel has had to keep receipts on this kind of thick, depraved enemy. Counter case was also made that if any side in this conflict is genocidal, it is Hamas.
הם לא נראים מוטרדים שמישהו יטריע לגורם ישראלי על הכוח הגדול שדוהר מזרחה. להפך. השנייה באמצעות גישרוני ברזל שהביאו בדיוק למטרה הזו. מי שמלפנים כבר מפוצץ את המכשול הבא. בזמן הלוחמה בבסיס, חוליה 4 פנתה מהכביש אל עבר הקיבוץ.
ايش الغرفة ما نعملها؟ امسك امسك.
4 המחבלים על 2 אופנועים נאבקים עם השאר.
ها بدها طاخ ابعد على الفاضي بنكسر ايش
يلا
ها اهدوا ايش وين
ابعد يا ابني
وين في حدا
لا حرجين
בניסיון לבלום את המחבלים נהרג חבר כיתת הכוננות עידו חוברה, זיכרונו לברכה.
יאללה, איש נבי.
חוליה אחת מתארגנת בממד.
ليش مستفقرين على قد الساعة شايل انت مش حارس ايش فيك انا تعال
הם מתחילים לשוטט בשבילים, כולם בממדים.
معقول 200 واحد في صدوق طب وين دخلوا عمون الملاجئ عمون الملاجئ
נראה שצמד המחבלים לא מבין שהממדים הם בבתים ובתוכם התושבים.
There's only the window of time on October the 7th that prevented them from killing more Jews in their horrific anti-Semitic bloodlust. And rhetoric has always been genocidal. There's always been anti-Semitic. They're just committed murderers. They're never complacent, just existing peacefully in the Gaza and making the best of the situation they've been handed. No, they always have to find ways to breach that defense and kill innocent Jews. Why they do it, it just makes no sense. I've watched footage of them breaking into Israel and I just do not get what they're doing or why. It's, for a horrible moment in this court case, I thought they were going to be somehow rewarded. That their tactics, their barbaric, sick tactics, were going to pay off. And it's brought something into crystal clear focus for me. Sometimes I am swayed to the passions of the ceasefire crowd, the Free Palestine crowd. Sometimes I am swayed to their passions. But this court case, and the way it was prosecuted, has shown me that they can't be given an inch because they don't care whether they're fair or foul. They don't care, which horrific terrorist group they are exonerating with their actions. They don't care if they're exonerating Hamas. They don't care what Hamas did. They don't care what the Jewish people suffered. They don't care what the Israeli people suffered on October the 7th.
Hamas is a terrorist organization.
South Africa, like many other countries in the south, has not declared Hamas as a terrorist organization. That does not mean we condone what Hamas has done. The fact that other jurisdictions have declared them a terrorist organization does not mean that we should do the same. You see that Hamas is active in places like Qatar and Turkey formally. In South Africa, they are not active. They don't have any bases there, which has been claimed as well. We engage with all Palestinian stakeholders. We have the colleagues here from the Palestinian state. We've got Mr. Ammar Hijazi, who's the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in Palestine, and I don't know if you'd like to comment on that as well, but from our perspective, I've just given you that perspective.
They don't care. All they care about is bringing Israel down, hating the West, hating Israel, and they don't care if they're going to bring about a case in which it becomes precedent now that a country at war with terrorists can now be prosecuted for fighting terrorists, for fighting back, for defending itself against a terrorist threat, which has terrible implications not just for Israel, but for every single country in the West. For every single country. Britain has had to deal with terrorist threats, and we're not doing it terribly well. France has a huge problem with Islamic terrorism. Germany does. Even Sweden has suffered terrorist attacks, which just shows you how evil, Islamic terrorism is. What an evil force it is, and why. There can be no leniency with it. And we're not even living with terrorist nations at our doorstep, whereas Israel is. And, this court, this effort to prosecute Israel, wanted to leave Israel defenseless against an utterly evil threat. And they wanted that threat emboldened, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere.
The State of Israel shall immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. 2. The State of Israel shall ensure that any military or irregular armed units which may be directed, supported or influenced by it, as well as any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction or influence, take no steps in furtherance of the military operation referred to point 1 above.
They wanted nations to be powerless to fight back against Islamic terrorists, which was, if anything, going to embolden Islamists. And it reinforced to me that I can't be sentimental to the pro-Palestine side anymore. I never should be. Because I know what their end game is. I know how devious and malicious they are. How determined they are to ruin a nation. To ruin nations and empower evil forces that actually do want genocide. That actually do want the Jewish state destroyed. They want the Jewish people exterminated. There can be no compromise with these people. It is tragic that civilians are dying in this war. It is tragic that children are dying in this war. But the left is siding with the government, the terrorist government, that exposed them to the most harm. That did nothing to provision for their safety or for their humanitarian needs. That's not Israel's fault. I'm not going to join the lynching of Israel. Because I know what that looks like now. I know what the creepy agenda was here. And it wasn't to bring justice for Palestine. It was to embolden Palestine's most vile tyrants. South Africa has hosted Hamas as friends. South Africa is incredibly corrupt. And I hope this case, that by the time this video comes out, this case will be left out of court. But if South Africa win this, we're all screwed. Every single country in Europe and the United States is screwed as well. We're all facing an Islamic terrorist threat of some form. And if it becomes enshrined in law that, that our nation is going to be punished for fighting back against this evil menace, then we're done for. We are truly done for.
A civil service insider has exclusively revealed that a woke counter-terrorism course is being delivered to civil servants. It warns them that labelling terrorism as terrorism is problematic because it implies moral judgment. It's then asked participants to consider Hamas as, wait for it, freedom fighters. I'm joined now by the former civil servant who brought this story to light, Anna Stanley. Anna, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. We've been talking about this story all day today on Talk TV, so I'm very pleased that we're able to get you on to actually give it some context. I mean, it seems incredible that senior civil servants from the Foreign Office, the Department of Defence, the Home Office would be going to these kind of seminars at King's College, almost because they've been ordered to do so, to listen to this kind of claptrap. I mean, what did you make of it all?
I mean, to be honest, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm such a fan of your show, and I know my mum is too. To be honest, the response to my article has been really vindicating and affirming, because to be quite honest, I was really the only person in the room, it felt like, who thought there was quite a lot of things wrong with the teaching, and a lot of things that, I was privy to there. And so, it was very existentially depressing and quite alienating to be on that course and feel that. It's been really affirming, knowing that there's a lot of people who agree that what went on and what was said by some of the lecturers was really quite appalling and worrisome.
Yeah. And when you say you were one of the few people who sort of seemed to find that it was a bit weird and something wrong was going on, what was everybody else doing then? Are you saying that many of the civil servants who were there were sort of nodding along sagely?
Yeah, I mean, people really seem to be enjoying it quite a lot. I mean, like I said in the article, there was one occasion where one of the attendees professed on 2 different occasions, actually, that her brother was radicalized as a jihadi in Syria, and then later on that she knew someone who was actually on a jihadi advertisement. And even that I was quite gobsmacked by, especially because she wasn't saying it in a way that was kind of embarrassed or anything like that. And as for the lecturer, Professor Newman, the comment that he made about Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan about wanting them to be suppressed, I was so shocked when I heard that. I was really taken aback. And honestly, throughout the course, I was constantly looking around the room, kind of like mouth agape, and I just wasn't getting any feedback from anyone else that they found it at all concerning.
The Islamist threat is bad enough. And it's going to remain bad enough for a long time. I pray this gets thrown out. I pray that Israel wins. Not because I agree with everything Israel has done in this. I don't, because I don't. But because I know what them losing means. It means Hamas winning. And it means groups like Hamas being emboldened in bigger and more terrifying ways to bring their death cult on us all. I hope this gets thrown out, and I hope Israel can continue with this operation to kill every last member of Hamas in Gaza. Whatever it takes. And the fact that the left are cheering them on just shows me that the enemies of the West will never stop. They've enjoyed a certain populist appeal for too long.
You mentioned, of course, this preposterous action by the South African government. If you go to South Africa, as I have been, you'll find that, I mean, South Africa is one of the most beautiful and amazing countries in the world, and it's one of the most hideously run. Major cities like Johannesburg have massive electricity blackouts. There's horrible corruption by the government. They can't provide the most basic things for the people, and, you know, terrible violence and much more, and horrible poverty in the townships. South Africa, however, is, its government is profoundly anti-Semitic, has been anti-Israel for years, and they always do this sort of thing to try to sort of distract attention among their own population from the failings of their own government. It's very telling, by the way, Julia, that one of the people who's joined this initiative of the South Africans to try to take Israel to The Hague for a non-existent war crime. One of the people who's joined that effort is Jeremy Corbyn, of course. And you mentioned, Julia, that I've been in Gaza quite a bit recently. I have, and it's true I've been in with the IDF. And I haven't been allowed to roam around freely. I've been allowed to roam around quite a bit. But one reason why you can't roam around very freely in the Gaza, certainly not if you're a Western journalist, is because of Hamas. Yeah. Hamas, of course, has spent years killing and torturing any Palestinian journalist who doesn't support them. They're not very keen on most Western journalists unless they happen to be saying exactly what Hamas wants them to say. And even so, it's not a great situation. So No, roaming freely in the Gaza isn't a great idea at the moment, not least because Hamas keep on popping up from tunnels and taking shots at everyone.
Yeah.
But the idea that the South Africans and others are trying to make these monstrous claims against the Israelis is really quite something. Israel is fighting a very, very tough battle in Gaza. Because, as I reported in the New York Post last week, every second house in the Gaza has munitions found in it. Every mosque that the IDF goes into has munitions in it. Every UN school that they go into has munitions in it and entrances to tunnels. And one soldier I spoke to on the record just last week, who does a lot of this house-to-house work and has been in there for months doing this, said to me, at this stage, when they go into a house and they try to find out where the entrance to the tunnel is in a house or where the munitions in the house are being stored, they go straight to the children's room because that's where the weapons are kept. He described how they turn over the children's beds and that's where you find the entrances to Hamas's terror tunnel networks. That's where you find the munitions. Just last week, he said he turned over the cot in one bedroom, a children's bedroom in the Gaza. He turned over the cot, and of course, there underneath it was a rocket-propelled grenade that Hamas had stored there. So it's an incredibly difficult battle that's going on. There's a massive civilian population who are caught up in it. But I think everyone has to realize, among other things, that this civilian population was handed the Gaza in 2005 by the Israelis, who took every single Jew out of Gaza. They forced them out of their homes. Hamas was Gaza rather, the Palestinians were effectively given a state in Gaza. There were no Jews, no Israelis. And what did they do with it from 2005 onwards? The population voted in Hamas, which then did a coup against Fatah, which killed their fellow Palestinians, and so they've had 18 years to run a state. And this is what we have, Julia. All the people who talk about the two-state solution and all this sort of thing should remember there was a state given to the Palestinians in 2005, and all that the world got, all that we taxpayers in the West got, was a terror state.